Have you ever wondered why the US dollar is so powerful? Why, no matter where you go in the world, people are willing to accept it? A big part of the answer lies in a system that has been quietly shaping our world for decades, the petrodollar system. It sounds complicated, but stick with me and I'll break it down for you. This isn't just about money, it's about power, politics, and the future of the global economy. So let's rewind to the early 1970s. The world was in a bit of a financial mess. In 1971, US President Richard Nixon made a shocking announcement. He declared that the US would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed rate. This decision, known as the Nixon shock, effectively ended the Bretton Woods system, which had pegged global currencies to the US dollar, which was in turn pegged to gold. Suddenly, the dollar's value was floating, and the world needed a new anchor for the global financial system. Around the same time, another crisis was brewing. The 1973 oil crisis hit, and oil prices skyrocketed. Oil exporting countries, especially those in OPEC, were suddenly swimming in US dollars, but they were worried. With the dollar no longer backed by gold, its value was uncertain. They needed a guarantee. This is where some brilliant, and some might say ruthless, diplomacy came into play. The US government, led by figures like Henry Kissinger, struck a deal, primarily with Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter. The agreement was simple but profound. Saudi Arabia would price all its oil exports exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the US would provide military protection and support to the Saudi kingdom. Other OPEC countries soon followed suit, and just like that, the petrodollar system was born. This wasn't just a simple currency choice. It was a masterstroke that reestablished the US dollar's dominance. Think about it. Every country in the world needs oil. And if you want to buy oil from the biggest producers, you need to have US dollars. This created a massive, constant global demand for dollars. It didn't matter if you were Japan, Germany, or Brazil. To power your economy, you first had to acquire greenbacks. This arrangement had huge benefits for the United States. First, it created what some call an exorbitant privilege. Because everyone needed dollars, the US could print more money to finance its spending and deficits without causing massive inflation at home, as the demand for those dollars was global. It's like having a credit card with an incredibly high limit and very low interest rates, backed by the entire world's need for energy. This constant demand also helps keep the dollar's value relatively high. A strong dollar means Americans can buy imported goods more cheaply, from electronics to cars, which contributes to a higher standard of living. It also makes U.S. financial assets like stocks and bonds more attractive to foreign investors. They buy oil, get paid in dollars, and what do they do with those mountains of cash? They often invest them back into the U.S. economy, buying U.S. Treasury bonds. This cycle, known as petrodollar recycling, helps fund the U.S. government's debt at lower interest rates. It's a beautifully designed system if you're the one at the center of it. For the rest of the world, the petrodollar system has been a mixed bag. On one hand, it provided stability. Having a single reliable currency for the world's most critical commodity simplified trade and finance. It created a predictable framework for the global economy to operate within. However, it also created significant dependencies. Countries had to hold large reserves of US dollars, which tied their economic fate to the health of the US economy and the decisions of the US Federal Reserve. If the Fed raises interest rates, it can cause capital to flow out of developing countries and back to the US, creating financial instability. This dependence has been a source of resentment for many nations, who feel the system gives the US an unfair advantage and too much geopolitical leverage. The US can use its control over the dollar-based financial system to impose sanctions, effectively cutting countries off from the global economy. Now, we're living in a time of incredible change. The world is shifting, and the foundations of the petrodollar system are being challenged. This process is often called de-dollarization, and it's happening for several reasons. First, the geopolitical landscape is changing. The rise of China as an economic superpower is a major factor. China is now the world's largest oil importer, and it is not comfortable with a system that forces it to rely on its main geopolitical rival, its currency. Russia, facing heavy Western sanctions, has also been aggressively moving away from the dollar. These two powers are increasingly conducting their energy trade in their own currencies, the yuan and the ruble. We're seeing new alliances form, like the BRICS group, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which are actively exploring ways to trade with each other using local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. They're even discussing the possibility of creating a new reserve currency. Second, the energy market itself is transforming. The shale revolution in the United States has turned it from a major oil importer into one of the world's top producers. This reduces its own reliance on Middle Eastern oil and changes the old dynamics. At the same time, the global push towards renewable energy, like solar and wind, means that over the long term, the demand for oil might decline. If oil becomes less central to the global economy, the petrodollar system built around it will naturally lose some of its power. So what does the future hold? Will the dollar collapse overnight? Probably not. The petrodollar system is deeply entrenched. The US dollar is still the world's primary reserve currency, and US financial markets are the deepest and most liquid in the world. There's no clear, immediate alternative that offers the same level of trust and stability. The Chinese yuan, for example, isn't freely convertible, and its financial markets are still controlled by the state, which makes many countries hesitant to adopt it as a primary reserve currency. However, what we are likely to see is a slow, gradual shift towards a more multipolar currency world. Instead of one dominant currency, we might see a few major currency blocks, one centered around the dollar, another around the euro, and perhaps a third around the yuan. Trade will happen in a variety of currencies, giving countries more flexibility and reducing their dependence on any single nation. For the United States, this transition could be challenging. A decline in global demand for the dollar could mean higher inflation and higher interest rates at home. The exorbitant privilege might fade, forcing the U.S. to be more fiscally responsible. Its ability to use financial sanctions as a foreign policy tool could also be weakened. For the rest of the world, it could mean more economic sovereignty. Countries would have more choices and be less vulnerable to the economic policies of the United States. However, this multipolar world could also be more fragmented and potentially less stable, at least during the transition period. The story of the petrodollar is a fascinating look at how money, energy, and power are interconnected. It is a system born out of a crisis that defined the global economy for half a century. But now, the world is changing, and the petrodollar system is changing with it. The era of absolute dollar dominance may be coming to a close, and we are entering a new, uncertain, and incredibly interesting chapter in global finance. What comes next will shape the world for generations to come. Thanks for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next video. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.